France's seventh change and Italian independence strange. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is January 27th, 2018. And on this date in history, in 1985, my parents bought their first new car. We got to be that family for about a week. A uh, it was a Dodge minivan. So what a happy day that was in 1985.
Okay, so the Fenians. This is a secret 19th century Irish and Irish American organization that was dedicated to overthrowing British rule in Ireland. Uh, these Irish Americans put together a big, massive army that actually would invade Canada in 1866 and 1870. The idea was to go in and try and get Canada to help retaliate against England as well. But the Canadian relationship with England was much different than the Irish. The Irish had been invaded about 700 years earlier. The people had been enslaved because they didn't have, or they weren't Christians, so they were seen to have no soul. So if you've ever heard the statement, gingers have no soul, it comes from back during that time whenever Christianity had not reached the island of Ireland, and as a result, you could do whatever you wanted to the people. The Irish really pushed hard, and they got more and more radical over the years. They staged a revolution during World War One, and they were bombing important targets in the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s before they finally came to a peaceful resolution. A lot of Irish want to unite Northern Ireland with Ireland, and well, so far has not happened. Okay, so in France, remember how stable the French government's been. So Louis Napoleon, who is the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Napoleon III, his father, maybe it was the great nephew, uh, either his father or grandfather was the king of Spain, so he was kind of seen as Napoleon II, and this is Napoleon III. He was actually elected president in 1848, and after 3 years of being the president, he would stage a coup d'état uh, and promise to bring in universal male suffrage. And he convinced the French people to create the Second Empire, where he would be the leader of that, and much like from his family heritage, and make France great again. Under Napoleon III's reign, they modernized roads, harbors, canals, railroads. They legalized trade unions, and they provided hospitals and free medicine for the working class. The new streets were built specifically to make it more difficult for mobs to build barricades and for the army to stop revolutions. In fact, if you've ever been to France or really looked at a map of France, you would see that there are about, it feels like 10 or 15 roads that all come into the center of town. And so everything just kind of flows into there. So if you're an invading army, it makes it a little bit easier for you to take over Paris. But if you are a mob, it's hard to go in, set up a roadblock, and cause chaos. So what this would do would be to prevent future coup d'états by the people. But Louis Napoleon starts off as a president and will become an emperor. Well, anyway, the Baron von Haussmann. Okay, his job was to come in and tear down city walls to build a sanitary system. Right there is the Arc de Triomphe, and like I said, you look at all the roads going in to the Arc de Triomphe, and you can stand there, and it just kind of looks like you can turn and look down every direction and see a road. but build a sanitary system, sewers, water lines in boulevards, opera houses, and theaters. Make it modern and make people want to be part of what's going on there. Now, we talked a little bit, I believe, about the Monroe Doctrine and some of the fallout from it, and the loss of all of the Spanish empires in the last unit. Well, so Europe was kind of in a panic mode in the 18 teens and 1820s. Much of this a result of Napoleon Bonaparte. And as a result of that, whenever the U.S. established this policy that it was in charge of the New World, they got away with that kind of policy because no one was really, in a place to try and challenge it. Now, the Civil War starts, and the United States becomes embroiled in a war between the North and the South, and France really sees this as, or Napoleon sees this as an opportunity to establish himself as the leader, or not establish himself, but establish a colony that would kind of be a puppet government to the French, give them actual or additional resources. And so what he does is he sends some troops to Mexico. They invade and push towards Mexico City. This is where they have the famous Battle of Puebla, where the Mexican forces will stop the French. It was on Cinco de Mayo and 1863. And the French army decides to go around Puebla. They go and they take over the country, and they install this Austrian by the name of Emperor Maximilian into the throne for an empire in Mexico. He goes with his wife, the beautiful Carlotta, who I think named herself after I've seen images of her. So he was there for about 2 years, and whenever the Civil War was over, they realized that they needed to pull out of Mexico, and so the French army was removed in what year was that? In 1866, about a year after the war was over, and Maximilian stayed in France, thinking that. Or not in France, but in Mexico, thinking that the Mexican people would love him. I mean, he did a lot. He did more to take care of the poor than any other leader in the first 50 years of the country. And so, with that line of reasoning, he decides to stay behind, and it ultimately becomes the cause of his death. His wife was there to witness his execution, and Maximilian, you got to hand it to you. You died rather violently. So you have, I mean, probably should have done this. Well, anyway. So the birth of the Third Republic of France. Napoleon III, during his reign, could not do anything to stop Italian unification or the German unification. Both would become new nations and threaten the status quo of Europe over the next century, and try and establish themselves in the same way that Britain and France were allowed to over the last, 500 years. The failure of the French Empire in Mexico, ultimately, and then Napoleon III was actually captured in 1870 by the Prussian army that he was leading into battle during the German unification. And an elected constituent assembly established a Third Republic, which, as we saw, or as we will see, is ultimately going to become the Second Empire. Second Empire becomes the Third Republic, and I believe it's followed by a monarchy. They bounce around. There's very unstable French governments during the 19th century. The Crimean War. Now, this is really seen as the last major, or the only major conflict that happens during the 19th century. So right there, pictured on the right-hand side, you can see Crimea, that is in the Black Sea. Okay, the Ottoman Empire had slowly begun to fall apart in 1699. So 1453 to 1699, that's whenever it was really an empire. And then slowly after that, it's slowly beginning to crumble. And by 1900, the Ottoman Empire is seen as the sick man of Europe. In fact, that's really exactly how it's referred to, as the sick man of Europe. So in 1699, it lost Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, Slovenia, and to the Austrian Empire. Russia had seized Crimea in 1783 and Bessarabia in 1812. Greece had independence, so basically what's going on here is they're losing massive amounts of land every year. Okay, Russia wanted the Dardanelles Straits. Okay, that is right there between the Greek side of the peninsula and what is today Turkey. And this would give them direct access to Europe and the Mediterranean. Well, anyway. Okay, so the reason that the Crimean War is actually going to start is because Napoleon III demands that the Ottoman Empire, or the sick man of Europe, as I stated just a moment ago, would go in and protect Christian minorities, okay, that are within the Ottoman Empire, okay. So this is kind of the reason that things start, okay, and Russia is going to use this opportunity to go in and try and take this land that it had sought for quite some time. The Russian Navy just shatters the Ottoman fleet. Okay, it's not really even a contest between the two, and they moved into Romania, France. They moved into Romania at that point. Now, France and Britain declared war, and Russia is going to help Austria, but Austria is going to take the Romanian lands as well. So, it's during this that you have the famous charge of the Light Brigade. Okay, basically a bunch of men that know that they've been ordered into their death. You have the famous poem by Alfred Tennyson, "Theirs is not to ask why, theirs is but to do or die," and they charge into what is sure suicide. And of the 670 men that stormed in, 270 of them were killed. Over that number were wounded as well. You know, it's kind of the famous charge of the soldier, that you're ordered, sometimes to your death, and you know it's coming, and you really have no choice but to accept your fate and move on. So the Crimean War was the first industrialized war. Okay, actually, there were American advisors that were there to watch how the war was waged. You had the use of the telegraph to send messages back and forth. The first use of trenches, which is why they were used in the Civil War. The use of railways to send men and supplies. Very poor communication, massive strategic errors, and disease is going to kill about 250,000 people. Now, in the history of warfare, the largest killer of men has been disease until World War II. Once World War II comes around, they start giving everyone shots and and vaccinations going into the war, and that's going to reduce the number of people that die as a result of that. A lot of people are going to die from cholera, and cholera is basically when you become so dehydrated from diarrhea that you die. Okay. Nicholas I, the leader of Russia, will die, and his son Alexander II will sue for peace. Now, during this time period, Florence Nightingale makes a major difference in the war. She helps found the nursing profession as we know it today. And women were not allowed to work in the nursing profession for reasons that I will never understand until the Crimean War and the Civil War. It does show that women's roles were not relegated to the home. Instead, it allows women to work outside the home in a socially accepted way. So ultimately, the Treaty of Paris of 1856, Russia demilitarized the Black Sea. It doesn't expand into the Balkans, and it destroys the concert of Europe, although I would argue that the concert of Europe is still kind of in play because people still have scars from the wars from Napoleon. So no one's really ready to step in and try and fill this crazy void that's been left by warfare during this time. And so it's the last really major armed conflict. You'll see a little bit of an armed conflict whenever Germany tries to unite at the beginning of class next time. But as for this time period, this kind of ends the major fighting for another 58 years anyway. So, I don't know, I would call that very successful. So, Italian unification. By the way, if you're going to grow a mustache, you grow it like that. That is great. You have a W mustache. Okay? The Italian unification is completely different from what the Germans do. They use much more of a... they make alliances. There's much more diplomacy in the way that they do it when the Germans will unite through brute force. So they'll have different alliances that allows them to get lands. Okay, so nationalists, and these are people that really love Italians and the Italian people, Italian culture. And so, that's what nationalists are anyway. They are people that are all about the group of people that you belong to. You're patriotic towards your people, not necessarily the country you're in, unless you can establish a country of your people, which was the goal of the Italians. So they wanted a united republic. They wanted to take away the papal states. And so they were really dominated. The northern part was dominated by Austria, and that had to change. So Piedmont, Sardinia, from that area, Victor Emmanuel II, that's him to the left. He's going to appoint Prime Minister Camillo Benso di Cavour. Okay, and part of his job is to try and bring everything together. Okay, he updates the budget. The tax system, he builds railroads, he limits the church, and he builds a strong army. Okay, I believe I have a better picture of kind of what Piedmont, Sardinia is coming up on the next slide. Okay, so here, this is Sardinia right here, and here is the Piedmont area. Okay, so these areas had already been united. Okay, so Cavour, who we were just speaking about, he used diplomacy because he doesn't have a military like the Prussians do to beat Austria. So in his first real attempt at making something happen here, he cites the Treaty of Plombières with France to invade Austria. Okay, so when they win the war, this starts northern revolutions within Italy, and they join up with Piedmont, Sardinia. And so Napoleon III is going to support this because he wants Nice and Savoy. These are regions that are in France and are still in France today. France helped Italy win Lombardy, which is another region of Italy, and the national revolts helped win northern states, which joined Piedmont, Sardinia. So Piedmont, Sardinia, these two areas are slowly starting to unite Italy together into one large nation. Okay, so now the south, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. You have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies here. So Garibaldi, that's him to the left, he raises an army called the Red Shirts. And they conquered the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, that's Sicily and Naples. And they moved up the peninsula, and they're going to give the Two Sicilies to Emmanuel II to try and unite the two regions together. Okay, there's a better marked Piedmont and Sardinia, and you can see kind of the route that Garibaldi's going to work moving its way up north. So Italy is going to join in an alliance with Austria-Prussia, and this is going to gain Venetia. You can see that area up there in green, and Rome in 1870, whenever Prussia defeats France. So, like I said, some great diplomatic moves here to unite the two countries together. Austria-Hungary. So after their defeat in the war with Italy, Emperor Franz Joseph is going to create a parliamentary system also called the Reichsrat. Okay, Franz Joseph is actually going to be in power for about 65 years. So in the Augsgleich of 1867, Joseph accepted a dual monarchy, and that gave Magyar autonomy with common ministries of finance, war, and foreign affairs. So this is why this becomes Austria-Hungary. When you hear the Magyars are the same thing as Hungary. Okay, so Austria controlled several different groups of people: the Germans, Czechs, Poles, and other Slavic groups. The Magyars will help the Austrians suppress all Slavic language and culture, and do what they can to help unite the two largest groups in Austria-Hungary. And they're going to pass universal male suffrage in 1907, but still it's going to be Austria-Hungary controlling everything that's happening in there. This leads us to the end of today. I hope everyone's doing well. Stay safe, don't cocaine, don't AIDS, and if you see someone coveting, tell them not to do it. This is Mr. Dugdale, and I will see you on the other side. Be safe. But don't be a bee. Like a bzz, not the other kind that I'm not going to talk about.